The land stretched endlessly, a canvas of brown and green, until the chains arrived. The soil had never known the weight of such hands before, the hands of a man bound not just by iron, but by a life already claimed by others. The wind moved freely over the fields, bending the tall grass and teasing the edges of a world that would soon be reshaped by labor, by sweat, and by the unspoken cruelty of authority. When the slave first stepped onto the land, he was young, his bones still resilient enough to endure whatever was demanded, yet untested by the endless grind of toil that awaited him. He carried nothing with him. No family, no possessions, not even the dignity of a name. It had been stripped away long before he had been brought to this place. He had been told only to work, and the command was spoken once, sharply, without mercy, so that he would never forget it. He would build the mansion, he would build it with his hands, and he would never enter it. That prohibition was a blade sharper than any whip, cutting into his future, shaping his life into a labor he could never claim as his own. From sunrise to the dull red of evening, he worked. The first days were the most punishing, for the land resisted him as much as his overseers did. Stones buried beneath layers of soil, roots that refused to be cut, mud that stuck to boots and skin alike, all became instruments of exhaustion that he bore without complaint. He learned quickly that fatigue was nothing compared to the consequences of hesitation. The overseers did not speak often, but when they did, their words were permanent scars. One mistake, one glance in the wrong direction, 1 second of defiance, and the lashes would find him. But even in pain, he persisted. His hands became maps of his endurance, covered in scars that no one would ever admire. Each cut, each blister, was a reminder that he was both creator and prisoner, that the mansion rose on the architecture of his suffering. The master visited only occasionally, yet each appearance sent a tremor of terror through him. The man stood tall, his presence unyielding, as if his shadow alone could command obedience. He spoke of legacy, of a house that would outlast flesh and blood, of walls that would witness history and shield his name from decay. The slave heard these words without looking, for eye contact was dangerous. A single meeting of gazes could be interpreted as audacity, as insolence, as a claim that was never meant to be his. And still, he listened, absorbing every instruction, every expectation, though none were addressed to him as a person. He was a tool, a machine of creation, tasked with shaping grandeur he could never enjoy. The irony was cruel. He could measure each stone, each pillar, each corridor with perfect precision, yet he would never feel the echo of his footsteps in the hallways he had carved from nothing. Night brought no comfort. When the sun dipped below the horizon and shadows lengthened across the nascent structure, he slept near the foundation, curled on the hard ground. Rain would come sometimes, hammering against the walls he had built, yet he did not retreat. He lay listening to the hollow heartbeat of the mansion, memorizing its rhythm, tracing it in his mind with the precision that his body refused to abandon. He imagined the rooms, the staircases, the grand halls, the balconies where laughter and music would someday fill the air, none of which he would ever witness. It was a cruel fantasy, yet it was all he had. In the dark, he imagined walking across polished floors, feeling the cold of marble underfoot, the warmth of hearths ignited for other people. And in those imagined moments, he understood the depth of the injustice that had become his life. Days turned into months and months into years. The mansion grew taller, more elaborate, more impossible to ignore. Walls stretched skyward, windows gleamed in the sunlight, and rooms multiplied beyond count. Each addition demanded new sacrifices of his body. He learned to read the weight of stone as if it were a language, to anticipate how beams would settle, how arches would curve, how ceilings would bear the weight of dreams not meant for him. Other slaves came and went, sold or broken or buried, but he remained. He was indispensable, and for that he was imprisoned. They called him the builder, as if the word could replace a name, as if title could grant dignity. It did not. Every accolade, every word of acknowledgement, was accompanied by the reminder that he could never cross the threshold of his own work. As he worked, he observed the world he would never join. The master entertained guests, their laughter spilling across the grounds, carrying with it the perfume of power and wealth. Music floated through open windows, the soft clink of glasses and the shuffle of silk upon marble. He polished floors that would one day reflect candles and chandeliers, ceilings that would witness dances, staircases that would feel the touch of aristocratic hands, but never his. The mansion was alive, yet he was denied entry. The cruelty was subtle, architectural, and relentless. It existed in the very structure he had created, in the separation between life and the one who had built it. Over time, knowledge became his possession. He memorized every corner, every hallway, every detail with precision that no overseer could hope to match. He knew which walls were load-bearing, which floors could not bend, where drafts would creep in, where sound would echo. The mansion existed in his mind as much as in stone. The irony was bitter. The master believed himself the owner, yet only the slave held complete understanding of the creation. He had made it perfect, and yet it was a prison that mocked him with its grandeur. He bore the physical pain, but the emotional toll was worse. There were nights when he dreamed of doors opening, of stepping inside the mansion, of finally seeing the fruits of his labor as his own. And every time he awoke, the world was unchanged. The foundation he had poured still held him outside. The walls he had lifted still loomed above him like silent judges. His hope became a dangerous companion, one that had to be buried deeper each day. To dream of entry was to court punishment, to flirt with a longing that the overseers would never forgive. The master grew older, slower, more prone to rage at minor imperfections, real or imagined. Changes were demanded constantly. New wings, new rooms, balconies, decorative arches, marble inlays. The slave adapted. Every order became a new layer of endurance. He learned to anticipate needs before they were spoken, to predict the whims of a man who sought permanence while fearing mortality. He became invisible in his obedience, yet indispensable in his skill. Without him, the mansion could not rise. With him, it could not be claimed. Seasons shifted. Summers scorched the land, making each stone unbearably hot. Winters froze the ground, cutting his fingers and toes with frostbite. Yet the work continued. He learned to endure cold and heat alike, to feel pain as a companion rather than an enemy. Each ache, each blister, each laceration was a mark of survival, a testimony to his endurance. And still the mansion grew, sprawling in its perfection, a monument to his labor, a prison of exclusion. Occasionally he glimpsed those inside. He heard the master's children laughing, running through halls that would someday be named after them. Music and voices carried through open windows. Across courtyards he could sweep clean but never enjoy. Servants glided past in formal uniforms, attending to demands he had already anticipated. He moved like a shadow, always present, never recognized. A ghost whose every touch had shaped the world he could never touch. In rare moments of solitude, he reflected on his existence. The world had stripped him of a name, of family, of freedom, of comfort, and yet it had not stripped him of memory, nor of skill, nor of the secret domain that existed in his mind. He understood the mansion more intimately than anyone who would live inside it. He knew every echo, every angle, every seam. If one day the world would crumble and the mansion fell into dust, it would remember him. And that knowledge, silent and hidden, became a small, private solace amidst unending torment. Years accumulated like layers of stone. He aged, though not as visibly as the master, for his life was measured not by leisure or pleasure, but by labor. His body bore the architecture of suffering. Scarred hands, worn muscles, eyes that had witnessed sunrises and sunsets over fields he would never call home. And yet, within him, there was a quiet rebellion, one that required no words. It was a refusal to let the mansion claim his identity, a private possession of his mind, a proof that creation and ownership are not always the same. As the mansion neared completion, he felt the weight of history pressing on him. Each wall, each stair, each balcony he had built was a reminder of injustice, of life denied. The master's age slowed him, his commands grew erratic, but the builder endured. He worked without pause, without complaint, with the precision of a man who understood that the world might never reward him, might never recognize him, yet he alone held the truth of creation. And so the mansion stood, tall, imposing, gleaming under the sun, a masterpiece of stone and wood and human endurance. This grandeur was undeniable, its power absolute. And outside, the builder paused for the briefest of moments, running his hands across a stone he had polished with blood, sweat, and bone. He would never enter. He would never walk the halls he had created. And yet, in his mind, he had already moved through every room, heard every echo, felt every heartbeat of the building he had birthed into existence. That quiet, secret possession was all that remained his, a defiance not measured in freedom, but in understanding. Time passed, as it always does, slowly and relentlessly, indifferent to the labor of men or the ambitions of masters. Seasons turned, fields wilted and red-bloomed, and the mansion grew taller, more elaborate, more impossible to ignore. The slave had become part of the land itself, his presence inseparable from the stone and mortar, wood and iron that he had shaped with unyielding hands. Each day, he moved like a shadow among the growing structure, knowing where every beam must go, every window placed, every arch balanced. He was the pulse behind the building, the silent rhythm that ensured every brick, every plank, every carving bore the weight of perfection. And yet, he remained outside, a ghost who had given everything but would receive nothing. The world inside the mansion, the warmth of its fires, the laughter of its occupants, the luxury it promised, was denied to him with a cruelty so quiet it almost made it worse than the lash. The master's age became more apparent. His gait slowed, his voice lost its sharpness, yet his presence remained imposing, a constant reminder that authority need not be exercised loudly to dominate completely. He wandered through the mansion as it neared completion, inspecting, questioning, adjusting, as if perfection could be demanded of it endlessly. The slave worked tirelessly to meet the shifting standards, never allowed rest, never allowed a misstep. He had learned that anticipation was survival. To predict the master's whims before they were spoken was to avoid punishment. To hesitate was to invite it. The mansion became a living, breathing test of endurance, each room, each staircase, each balcony a testament to both human skill and human cruelty. Despite the unrelenting work, the slave's mind remained alive, sharp, attentive, storing every detail with the precision of a historian. He memorized the angles of ceilings, the way light would fall through windows at different hours, the echo of footsteps across polished floors. Every nail, every joint, every seam was etched into his memory, a secret map of a world he could never inhabit. This knowledge became his sanctuary, the only thing untouched by the master's power. In the quietest moments, he traced the corridors in his imagination, walked through the halls in the dark, touched the walls he would never feel. In a way, he had already entered, already claimed the mansion in a realm inaccessible to anyone else. The other slaves whispered among themselves, sharing fragments of stories, rumors of distant families, tales of master's cruelty, and snippets of fleeting hope. They often sought him out, sensing a presence both powerful and resigned, yet he rarely spoke. Words were unnecessary. His work, his endurance, his silence conveyed everything. They called him the builder, sometimes with admiration, sometimes with fear, for they knew that to cross him was to invite disaster. He had become more than a laborer. He had become a legend, a figure whose knowledge of the mansion made him untouchable in ways the master could never understand. And yet, untouchable did not mean free. Every breath, every motion, every thought was still governed by the invisible chains of expectation. As the mansion neared its final form, the master grew increasingly erratic. Commands came in waves, sudden and contradictory. One day a wing was to be added. The next a wing was to be removed. Marble inlays were demanded, then replaced with polished wood. Windows shifted positions, staircases redesigned. The slave adapted with quiet efficiency, learning to read not just the words of the master, but the fleeting expressions, the hesitation in his gestures, the subtle indications of approval or disapproval. Each adjustment was a test, a reminder that his life had no meaning beyond the perfection of the structure he served. Yet he endured. To falter was impossible. To stop was unthinkable. The mansion's completion depended entirely on him, yet he would never be allowed to cross the threshold, never allowed to see the fruits of decades of toil. There were nights when he lay awake under the stars, gazing at the silhouette of the building against the dark sky. Rain would fall, wind would howl, and he would trace the outlines of every balcony, every tower, every window with his eyes closed, committing the mansion to memory once more. In these hours, he felt the weight of his own absence most acutely. The world he had created existed without him, yet it was incomplete without him. He had built perfection that could never be enjoyed by its maker. This paradox became a quiet agony, one that settled into his bones, one that no lash, no command, no exhaustion could touch. Rumors began to circulate among the overseers and other slaves about the builder. Some whispered that he possessed knowledge no mortal should have, that he could dismantle the mansion in his mind and rebuild it stone by stone. Others claimed he was cursed, bound to the structure, a spirit trapped between earth and architecture. The master neither confirmed nor denied these tales, but they served him well, for fear is a tool as effective as chains. The builder understood this. He had learned long ago that power was most absolute when invisible, when unquestioned, when internalized. He did not need acknowledgement. He did not need praise. He only needed to endure, to persist, and to carry the mansion within him. The master's family began to occupy portions of the mansion even before it was completed. The halls echoed with footsteps that were not his, voices that carried laughter and music, and the scent of food and wine drifted across rooms he had polished but would never enter. He swept floors they would tread upon, polished surfaces they would touch, built hearths that would warm bodies that were not his own. The cruelty was architectural. Every corner of the mansion reminded him of what he could never have. And yet, he continued, each action precise, each motion deliberate, knowing that his survival depended on perfection. Over time, his body bore the architecture of decades of labor. Hands were scarred, fingers stiff, back hunched from years of lifting and bending. But even as the flesh weakened, the mind sharpened. Every detail was preserved. The precise curvature of an arch, the exact spacing of floorboards, the weight distribution of beams, the acoustics of hallways. This knowledge was his secret rebellion, his silent dominion over the mansion he could never inhabit. Though the world denied him entry, he possessed the building in a way no one else could, and in that knowledge lay a quiet triumph that the master could never see. The master grew older still, his commands more erratic, his patience thinner, his appreciation for subtlety gone. He demanded that the mansion be flawless, that every room reflect the grandeur of his name, and that the builder continue to toil without pause or complaint. Yet, in his old age, the master's authority was paradoxically fragile. He was feared, yes, but he was also human, prone to error, prone to the frailty of flesh. The builder observed, learned, adapted, and in the quiet spaces between commands, he dreamed of what freedom might mean. Not freedom to enjoy the mansion. He had long abandoned that hope, but freedom to walk without fear, to move without chains, to breathe without expectation. One day, the master summoned him to inspect a wing newly completed, a grand hall with ceilings that soared impossibly high and floors that reflected light like liquid. The builder examined every detail, noting imperfections invisible to others, correcting flaws that could not be ignored. The master observed, nodding occasionally, speaking in fragmented sentences that expressed approval or dissatisfaction. And yet, even in this moment, he could not offer the builder entrance into the hall. The barrier was unspoken but absolute. The mansion could be admired by all who dwelled within it, but the hands that had created it could only stand outside, relegated to observation, relegated to silent endurance. As the years continued to accumulate, the builder's life became a cycle of creation and deprivation. Seasons passed, masters changed, children were born and grew. Yet he remained, a constant presence, the unseen hand behind grandeur, the ghost in the architecture. He had survived attempts at punishment, periods of famine, exposure to the harsh elements, and relentless labor. His resilience became legendary, whispered about among slaves and feared among overseers. And yet, despite every display of strength, he remained unseen, unheard, unacknowledged, the silent creator of a world he would never call home. The mansion, now nearing absolute completion, stood as a testament to endurance and cruelty intertwined. Towers reached skyward, balconies overlooked gardens that the builder had planted but would never walk, staircases spiraled in elegant arcs, and halls reflected the sun and moon in perfection. And yet, the builder remained outside, his existence entwined with the building yet barred from its embrace. He understood, perhaps more clearly than anyone, the paradox of creation without ownership, labor without reward, skill without recognition. And in this understanding, he found a measure of control, a quiet dominion over a world that could never claim him. The master's body grew frail, though his mind remained sharp enough to command, to intimidate, to remind all who labored that they existed only at his whim. Time had etched lines deep into his face. Hands that once struck with authority now trembled, and the echoes of his voice, once terrifying in their resonance, now wavered like distant thunder. He still walked the halls he had ordered built, still inspected the rooms, still demanded perfection. Yet the inevitability of mortality clung to him like a shadow. The builder observed these changes in silence, as he had always observed, measuring not just the angles of the mansion but the fragility of its master. In his mind, he traced the aging man's steps, anticipating the day when the chain that bound his labor to obedience might finally slacken, when the threshold that had been forbidden might be breached. As the mansion filled with life, the stark contrast between creator and inhabitant became more pronounced. Servants scurried through polished halls, children ran up staircases the builder had carved, laughter and music filled spaces he could never enter. The scent of meals drifted from kitchens he had constructed but could not taste, warmth radiated from hearths he had built but could not feel. He worked with relentless precision, yet every detail was a reminder of his exclusion. It was a cruel architecture, a punishment designed not through chains or whips but through the very beauty of what he had created. And still, he endured, his endurance becoming a testament to both his strength and the tyranny of the world he served. The builder's mind had become his fortress. Every wall, every corridor, every window, every staircase existed inside him as fully as they did in the physical world. He could walk through the mansion blindfolded, tracing the grain of the wood, the curve of the arches, the placement of beams and load-bearing columns. This secret knowledge was his rebellion, the one possession that the master could never claim. Though the world denied him entry, though the mansion existed as a prison and a monument simultaneously, he had claimed it in his mind. In the quiet moments, when the wind carried the distant laughter of those who lived inside, he would close his eyes and walk those halls alone, feeling their perfection and knowing that, in this private dominion, he was sovereign. As the master's health declined, his commands became more erratic, driven by paranoia and fear. Rooms were redesigned, wings expanded or removed, decorative features altered or replaced. Each new instruction demanded the builder's utmost precision and endurance. Errors were punished severely, yet perfection offered no reward. The mansion rose to its final form under his hands, flawless and imposing, yet utterly indifferent to the man who had built it. The irony was bitter and constant. He had created a palace for the living and yet remained a ghost outside its embrace, a shadow haunting the world he had made real. The household inside the mansion began to flourish, oblivious to the labor that sustained it. Dinners were held in grand halls, candlelight flickering over polished floors and gilded ceilings, music spilling from instruments tuned to perfection. The master's family walked the corridors, their footsteps echoing with a confidence built on the labor of a man who would never walk beside them. Servants attended to their every whim, and the rooms resonated with life and warmth the builder could never claim. Yet he remained, indispensable and invisible, the heartbeat behind the beauty, the silent architect of privilege he would never enjoy. In the solitude of night, the builder often considered the nature of time. Decades had passed since he first set foot on the land, decades during which the mansion had risen from earth and stone. He had aged, as all men do, though his body bore the scars of labor far deeper than the lines of age. Hands gnarled from years of lifting, back stiffened by endless toil, fingers cracked and calloused from shaping wood and stone. And yet, his mind remained sharp, the architecture of the mansion etched into memory with perfect clarity. He knew the building better than anyone alive. In a sense, he had become the mansion, his life intertwined with its walls, its floors, its ceilings, its secret spaces. And in that intertwining he found a quiet defiance, a form of power no master could strip away. Rumors spread quietly among the household and the laborers alike about the builder. Some whispered that he possessed knowledge no human could rightfully claim, that he could dismantle and rebuild the mansion with nothing but memory and hands. Others claimed he was cursed, bound eternally to the building, a ghost trapped in both body and mind. The master neither denied nor confirmed these tales. Yet they served him, for fear is a tool as effective as chains. The builder understood this perfectly. He did not need acknowledgement, he did not need reward. Knowledge, memory, and endurance had become his dominion, the one arena where he was truly sovereign. The final touches of the mansion were completed in this period. Floors polished to a reflective sheen, ceilings adorned with intricate patterns, fireplaces sculpted with ornate precision, windows positioned to capture sunlight at every hour of the day. The mansion was perfect in its physicality, yet the absence of its creator within its walls was the cruelest detail. Servants scurried past him daily. Guests moved through halls he had carved. Children played upon floors he had swept clean. And he remained outside, invisible yet omnipresent in the architecture. His exclusion was the most refined cruelty of all, a punishment executed not by lash or whip but by denial of presence, a denial that mocked him with the very elegance of the world he had built. As the master's health failed further, the atmosphere within the household changed. Servants whispered, children watched cautiously, and the household's sense of permanence wavered. The mansion, once a monument to power and authority, now stood as a testament to time and mortality. The master's voice, once commanding, grew frail, uncertain, tinged with desperation. Orders became inconsistent, sometimes impossible, sometimes contradictory. Yet the builder adapted. Each new command was met with obedience and precision, his mind racing to anticipate needs, to correct errors before they could manifest, to endure the shifting demands of a man who feared the loss of control above all else. And then, inevitability arrived. The master's body failed, slow and steady, until one day the final breath was drawn, leaving behind a household suspended in silence. The mansion, perfect and imposing, stood as a monument to his life and cruelty. Yet the one who had made it possible was still denied entry. Guards patrolled the grounds, servants whispered, and family members claimed their inheritance, unaware that the true architect of their privilege had been watching silently all along. The builder remained outside, as he had always been, bound to labor yet finally unbound from the master's gaze. The world had changed, but his place, still invisible and essential, persisted. With the master gone, the household's dynamics shifted subtly. The family moved freely through the mansion, spaces, hosting gatherings, celebrating their inheritance. The builder continued his labor, no longer under the direct scrutiny of the master, yet still bound by the unspoken rule. The mansion was not his to enter. His body, scarred and worn, moved with the precision of decades of habit, tending to maintenance, repairs, and adjustments that ensured the mansion's perfection endured. And in his mind, he walked through the halls freely, exploring rooms he would never see, hearing the echoes of his imagination rather than footsteps he could claim. Years accumulated like sediment, layers of experience, endurance, and observation. The builder aged, his hair graying, muscles stiffening, back bending. Yet his mind remained a repository of memory. Every architectural detail was stored within him, every echo preserved, every corner mapped. The mansion, in its physical form, belonged to others, yet in the one realm no one could touch, the builder was sovereign. His presence was everywhere and nowhere, shaping lives and spaces, influencing events, and yet remaining unseen. The paradox of creation without possession became his constant companion, a cruel but undeniable truth that he had come to accept and even embrace. Despite the outward stillness, he remained alert, his senses honed to the subtleties of life within the mansion. Sounds, smells, movements, all registered with the acuity of a man who had spent decades in intimate contact with the building. He knew when floors would creak under weight, when doors would not close properly, when shadows would shift unnaturally. This intimate knowledge, this unseen dominion, became a source of quiet satisfaction, a reminder that control need not be recognized to exist. Though he would never claim the mansion in life, he had claimed it in knowledge, and in knowledge there was power. The household, unaware of the depth of his understanding, relied on his labor as much as ever. Repairs were executed flawlessly, adjustments made invisibly, crises averted without recognition. The builder moved through the grounds like a ghost, attending to the mansion with care and precision, his presence necessary yet denied. The elegance of the halls, the harmony of the spaces, the perfection of the architecture, all bore the imprint of his hands and mind, though none inside would ever acknowledge it. And in that denial, in that invisibility, he found a measure of autonomy, a secret dominion over a world that could never claim him. Even as time wore on, he remained vigilant. Children grew, servants aged, and the mansion itself began to weather the seasons. Yet he adapted, repaired, maintained. His life had become inseparable from the building, intertwined in ways that no observer could comprehend. Every corner, every beam, every staircase was a testament to both human endurance and human cruelty, a monument to the paradox of creation without reward, skill without recognition, labor without freedom. In the stillness of night, when the household slept, he walked the mansion in his mind. He traced the corridors, climbed the staircases, crossed polished floors, and opened doors that existed only in memory. The sounds of laughter, of music, of life that belonged to others drifted through the walls, and he felt both pain and triumph. Pain because he remained outside. Triumph because no one could undo the knowledge, the mastery, the silent sovereignty he possessed. The mansion was theirs physically, but his in the realm no mortal could enter. The years following the master's death were a strange combination of freedom and continued servitude. The household had inherited the mansion, its grand halls and polished floors a testament to wealth and authority. Yet the builder remained tethered to the physical and invisible labor that had defined his life for decades. His body had aged under the relentless weight of toil. Muscles stiffened, bones ached with the memory of endless lifting. Hands bore permanent scars and calluses that told of unceasing work. Even as his frame weakened, his mind remained sharp, a repository of the mansion's every detail, every nuance, every echo that reverberated through its endless corridors. He had lived longer than most, not by fortune but by necessity, and the mansion, now complete, had become both his monument and his prison. Though the master had died, the unspoken rule remained absolute. He could never fully enter the mansion. The family members, heirs to the wealth and power he had helped build, saw him only as labor, essential but invisible. They walked the halls, their footsteps ringing across floors he had polished and maintained, unaware that every element of their comfort depended upon him. He repaired leaky roofs, strengthened weakened beams, and replaced decayed wood without pause, always moving unseen, always sustaining the home from which he was denied life. In these moments, he felt the cruelest irony of all. His skill had produced beauty, security, and life, yet his own existence remained unacknowledged, irrelevant except as a tool. The mansion, in its perfection, became a mirror for his life. Each polished surface reflected what he had built but not who he was. The high ceilings, once impossibly ambitious, now stood as symbols of endurance without reward. The winding staircases, elegant yet functional, traced paths he would never walk. The fireplaces he had sculpted radiated warmth that would never touch him. Even in his absence, he was everywhere, his labor infused into the wood, stone, and iron. He had become inseparable from the mansion. It was as much a part of him as his own body. Yet he remained denied access, a living testament to a paradox of creation without ownership. As decades passed, he began to reflect more deeply on his life and the nature of existence itself. He thought of the early days, when chains and commands were all he knew, when every sunrise was a call to endure, and every sunset a reminder of survival. He thought of the master, whose authority had defined his youth and early adulthood, whose whims had shaped the mansion and his life alike. He recalled the orders, the punishments, the moments of near despair, and the small triumphs of survival. Memory became both a refuge and a burden, a place where he could inhabit the mansion freely, where he could claim the life denied to him in reality. The builder's understanding of time deepened in ways that few could comprehend. Life was measured not in years, but in labor, in survival, in the silent endurance of cruelty. He had witnessed generations rise within the walls he had built, children grow into adults, and families shift and change. Yet through all of it, he had remained, a constant presence, an unseen force maintaining perfection, sustaining beauty, preserving legacy. His existence was paradoxical, essential yet irrelevant, powerful yet invisible, alive yet never fully present in the spaces he had created. He began to observe more acutely the ways in which life within the mansion unfolded. He noticed the subtle rhythms of the household, the ebb and flow of daily activity, the ways in which servants moved and masters commanded. He noticed the way light traveled across floors at different hours, the way sound echoed through halls, the way spaces felt different depending on occupancy. Every detail was recorded in his mind with precision, creating an internal map of the mansion that no one else possessed. Knowledge became his domain, his quiet rebellion, the one realm in which he exercised sovereignty despite the chains of circumstance. Loneliness became both companion and teacher. He moved through the world largely unacknowledged, yet intimately connected to the mansion. In the quiet moments of dawn or dusk, he would trace the paths of corridors with his mind, recalling the placement of beams, the angles of staircases, the pattern of tiles, the curve of arches. In this way, he possessed the mansion in a manner no one else could, a secret dominion that defied physical exclusion. He had become more than a man. He had become the essence of the home itself, a presence woven into its structure and yet forever denied its privileges. The physical toll of decades of labor could not be ignored. Pain settled deep into his bones, joints stiffened, and movements became labored. Each sunrise brought with it a reminder of his mortality, each sunset a reflection of endurance. Yet he adapted, continuing the work that sustained the mansion, tending to repairs, reinforcing structures, correcting flaws before they could cause damage. His body, though weakened, remained a tool of perfection, a mechanism through which the mansion continued to thrive. In every ache, in every scar, in every moment of exhaustion, he found proof of his existence, the affirmation that he had left a mark on the world that could not be erased. The family within the mansion remained largely unaware of the depth of his contribution. They walked through halls he had shaped, rested in rooms he had perfected, lived in comfort created by his hands. Yet they saw him only as labor, as presence without identity. Praise was rare, acknowledgement non-existent, and yet he continued, driven by habit, by necessity, and by a private sense of ownership. The mansion, perfect in its grandeur, was a reflection of his life, enduring, essential, yet tragically unclaimed. Memories of the master lingered, not as authority figures but as shadows that shaped his perception of power and cruelty. He recalled the commands, the punishment, the unyielding expectation of perfection. He recalled the fear that had governed every movement, every breath, every thought. And yet, he also recalled the lessons embedded in that fear. The importance of observation, the value of knowledge, the quiet power of endurance. These lessons became tools, not for rebellion but for survival, for mastery of the invisible domain in which he moved freely while others remained oblivious. Over time, he noticed the subtle decay that accompanied life. Floors creaked more, wood warped slightly, stone cracked, paint faded. These imperfections, though minor, were signals of mortality, of the passage of time that affected all things, no matter how grand or perfect. He corrected these flaws with meticulous care, preserving the mansion as he had always done. And in doing so, he realized the depth of his bond with the structure. It was not merely a building but an extension of his life, a canvas upon which he had inscribed decades of labor, endurance, and silent observation. Even as his body weakened, his mind remained a fortress of memory and knowledge. He could reconstruct any room, predict the sound of footsteps, anticipate the movement of air through hallways, recall every detail of construction with perfect clarity. This mastery became a private triumph, a form of power unrecognized by the world but absolute in its scope. Though excluded from physical entry, he possessed the mansion in a realm that no one could invade, a sovereignty that was both subtle and profound. The mansion itself became a character in his life, responding to his touch, his adjustments, his maintenance. Floors sang under his care, beams aligned perfectly, walls remained straight, windows reflected light precisely as intended. He moved through these tasks not merely as labor but as dialogue with the structure, a conversation that transcended words. The mansion and he were intertwined, inseparable, each sustaining the other. In this symbiosis, he found a measure of peace, though it was tempered by the constant reminder of exclusion, the knowledge that his hands had created life he could never inhabit. With each passing decade, he reflected more deeply on the nature of freedom and ownership. The mansion was physically possessed by others, yet it existed in his mind as his alone. Knowledge and endurance had become forms of sovereignty, proof that control need not be recognized to exist. He had created beauty, preserved legacy, and maintained perfection. And in doing so, he had exercised a quiet form of power that no wealth, title, or recognition could rival. This understanding became both solace and defiance, a recognition that though the world had denied him entry, it could not deny him mastery. Even in solitude, he remained vigilant. The mansion, though complete, required attention, and he moved among its halls, correcting flaws, tending to maintenance, adjusting imperfections before they could grow. His labor continued as habit, necessity, and devotion, a testament to endurance and precision. He observed life within the mansion without intrusion, hearing footsteps, laughter, conversations, and music, all of which underscored his absence. And yet, in every silent correction, every adjustment, every precise action, he asserted control, exercised mastery, and maintained a quiet dominion that no one else could claim. Decades had passed since the master's death, and the mansion stood unchanging in its grandeur, a silent testament to the hands that had raised it from earth, stone, and sweat. Yet time, relentless and indifferent, had not spared the builder. His body, worn by decades of labor and burdened by the invisible chains of servitude, ached in every joint, every bone. Fingers stiffened, back hunched, eyes clouded with age and exhaustion. But his mind remained a perfect archive of memory, capable of reconstructing every hall, every staircase, every room without error. He moved slowly among the mansion's foundations, repairing what decay had begun, maintaining perfection in a world that sought to erode all things. And still, he remained outside the spaces he had created, excluded from the life he had built with such endurance. The mansion's inhabitants had changed over time, generations passing through its halls, yet none comprehended the depth of the labor that sustained them. They moved as though the mansion had existed by itself, unaware that each polished floor, each carved arch, each balanced beam was a product of tireless hands and a mind honed by decades of knowledge. They laughed, celebrated, and lived within walls that carried the imprint of the builder. Yet he remained invisible, an unseen presence whose endurance allowed the continuity of life around him. The irony was bitter. The mansion was alive, animated by joy, music, and comfort. Yet he, its creator, remained an outsider. As he walked the halls in his mind, tracing steps along corridors no mortal had the right to traverse, he reflected on his life. Decades of labor, decades of pain, and decades of endurance had brought him to this moment. A quiet reckoning with both mortality and legacy. He thought of the master, of commands obeyed, punishments endured, and the relentless expectation of perfection. He remembered the fear that had governed his youth, the discipline that had shaped his adulthood. Decades had passed since the master's death, and the mansion stood unchanging in its grandeur, a silent testament to the hands that had raised it from earth, stone, and sweat. Yet time, relentless and indifferent, had not spared the builder. His body, worn by decades of labor and burdened by the invisible chains of servitude, ached in every joint, every bone. Fingers stiffened, back hunched, eyes clouded with age and exhaustion. But his mind remained a perfect archive of memory, capable of reconstructing every hall, every staircase, every room without error. He moved slowly among the mansion's foundations, repairing what decay had begun, maintaining perfection in a world that sought to erode all things. And still, he remained outside the spaces he had created, excluded from the life he had built with such endurance. The mansion's inhabitants had changed over time, generations passing through its halls, yet none comprehended the depth of the labor that sustained them. They moved as though the mansion had existed by itself, unaware that each polished floor, each carved arch, each balanced beam was a product of tireless hands and a mind honed by decades of knowledge. They laughed, celebrated, and lived within walls that carried the imprint of the builder. Yet he remained invisible, an unseen presence whose endurance allowed the continuity of life around him. The irony was bitter. The mansion was alive, animated by joy, music, and comfort. Yet he, its creator, remained an outsider. As he walked the halls in his mind, tracing steps along corridors no mortal had the right to traverse, he reflected on his life. Decades of labor, decades of pain, and decades of endurance had brought him to this moment. A quiet reckoning with both mortality and legacy. He thought of the master, of commands obeyed, punishments endured, and the relentless expectation of perfection. He remembered the fear that had governed his youth, the discipline that had shaped his adulthood, and the knowledge that had become both his weapon and his refuge. The mansion, perfect and imposing, was his creation, yet his life remained a testament to exclusion. The physical world had aged alongside him. Wood warped slightly, stone shifted under the weight of seasons, and minor imperfections began to appear despite his tireless attention. He corrected each flaw with meticulous care, preserving the mansion not for himself, not for those who dwelled within, but because the act of preservation had become his life. His endurance, his labor, his knowledge were inseparable from the structure. In this symbiosis, he found meaning, even as the world denied him recognition. Each repaired beam, each polished floor, each corrected arch was a silent assertion. The mansion existed because he had endured, and while no one may acknowledge it, it was truth nonetheless. He thought of the countless years he had survived, decades of sun, rain, cold, and heat, of exhaustion, pain, and punishment. He had seen generations of children grow, of families rise and fall, and yet he had remained, an eternal constant in the life of the mansion. His endurance was legendary, whispered among slaves and feared among servants, yet still unseen in the eyes of those who walked the halls he had created. This paradox, bitter and inescapable, defined him. He had become the mansion itself. Every wall, every staircase, every beam, every polished floor a reflection of his labor, his skill, and his suffering. He had become immortal in structure, though mortal in flesh. In the quiet hours of night, he walked the mansion in his imagination, tracing the paths he could never walk in reality. He opened doors that would never acknowledge his hand, climbed staircases he could never descend, felt the warmth of hearths he had built, and heard echoes of life that was denied to him. This mental dominion was his alone, a secret realm where control was absolute, and where no mortal could challenge him. In these imagined walks, he exercised sovereignty in a world that had denied him sovereignty in every other form. The mansion belonged to him not by law or title, but by knowledge and endurance. Yet even in this dominion, mortality pressed upon him. Pain settled deeper into his bones, breath grew shallow, and fatigue weighed heavier with each passing day. Memories of youth, of chains, of punishment, of relentless labor, surfaced with increasing frequency. He recalled the harsh hands of overseers, the sharp words of the master, the lashings of both metal and silence. Each recollection was a reminder of the price of endurance, of the cost of creation, and of the injustice of exclusion. And yet, through it all, he survived, driven not by hope of reward, but by habit, necessity, and the quiet assertion of mastery over the mansion that none could dispute. The mansion, now centuries old in its physical endurance if not in material, had become a character in his life. Its halls whispered to him, the floors responded to his touch, the walls conveyed their stability, and the ceilings bore witness to the decades of labor. Every adjustment he made, every repair executed with precision, was a dialogue between man and structure, a conversation that transcended words. The mansion carried the memory of his hands, his skill, and his knowledge. It was alive in a way that defied the understanding of those who walked its halls, yet it existed because of him, sustained by him, and inseparable from him. He began to reflect on legacy, the true measure of life and endurance. The mansion would remain long after he was gone, admired by generations who would never know the truth of its creation. The halls would echo with footsteps that were not his, laughter that was not his, music that would never acknowledge the labor behind its resonance. And yet, this permanence, this endurance was also his triumph. He had created something lasting, something perfect, something that could not exist without him. Though unrecognized in life, he had claimed immortality through creation, a legacy invisible yet absolute. His final years were marked by introspection and quiet action. He moved through the grounds, repairing what required attention, maintaining perfection in a structure that could never reward him. The world continued its rhythm. Children grew, families shifted, and life moved forward within the mansion he had created. Yet he remained, an enduring presence whose knowledge ensured the mansion's continued perfection. In every repair, in every adjustment, in every act of maintenance, he asserted his existence, his dominion, and his control. Though invisible, unacknowledged, and excluded, he held absolute mastery over the world he had built. As he sensed mortality drawing closer, he reflected on the cruel paradox that had defined his life. He had built beauty, sustained legacy, and preserved perfection, yet he had never been permitted to walk the halls he had carved, to rest by the fires he had lit, to inhabit the spaces he had shaped. Exclusion had been both punishment and definition, shaping him into endurance incarnate. He had survived every test imposed by life and by master, and in the face of relentless cruelty, he had maintained mastery where none could contest it. His life, measured in labor, endurance, and knowledge, had become a quiet triumph in a world that refused to acknowledge it. On the final day, he moved through the mansion one last time in thought. Every detail, every echo, every nuance was present in his mind. He traced staircases, opened doors, walked hallways, and climbed towers, all without crossing a single threshold. His final act of dominion was mental, spiritual, and complete. The mansion, perfect in its structure, was also perfect in his memory, a synthesis of creation, endurance, and control that could not be taken from him. He had built, he had endured, he had preserved, and in his consciousness he had claimed the mansion absolutely. And then he lay down in the fields surrounding the mansion, outside its walls as he had always been, feeling the earth beneath him, the wind across his face, and the faint echoes of the structure he had shaped. His body, frail and exhausted, gave way to rest, unrecognized by those who lived within the mansion, unclaimed by the world, yet entirely his in the realm of memory and mastery. He passed into silence, leaving behind a structure that would endure for centuries, a monument to labor, endurance, and the cruel paradox of creation without ownership. The mansion remained, timeless and imposing, filled with life, laughter, and music, yet forever shadowed by the memory of its builder. Though invisible to the world, his presence persisted in every stone, every beam, every polished surface. Generations would inhabit its halls, marvel at its beauty, and take comfort within its walls. Yet the truth of creation, the endurance, the labor, the invisible hand that had shaped perfection, would remain hidden, a secret owned only by the one who had built it. And in that secret, in the quiet triumph of absolute knowledge and mastery, the builder's legacy endured beyond life, beyond recognition, and beyond the cruel restrictions that had defined his existence.